What up, international relations people? It's me, your professor, Dr. Wes. You could just call me Wes. That's totally fine. You guys are awesome. Today we're going to talk about 2008 and the financial crisis and everything that happened. Let's just get right to it. There's a lot to talk about. First things first, let's talk about just a few current events. This happened over the weekend, Easter weekend. On Sunday, tornadoes ripped across the South. I know this article says 22. I've just read that number has been amended to 31, at least as of right now. But 1.3 million without power, which is extremely dangerous, especially when everybody's supposed to be at home quarantining for COVID. Now, one of the things that we should note here is that they've opened shelters for those without homes. This could be interesting, especially that we are going through a quarantine right now. So they've kind of not social distance and have had to force together in shelters. So, this is going to be really interesting down the road if we start seeing more cases in the South because of these tornadoes. Speaking of COVID, we have another article about another guy, I know we talked about this last week, but another official saying it'll be 18 months before we're finally free to start our businesses and get on with our lives and leave our house. 18 months. I'm not sure I believe that. First of all, a couple things. You can't keep the Americans down for 18 months. That's just insane. If we're not free to start business, to get back to work, to pay our bills, what are we going to do? Become reliant on the government? Maybe that's what they want. I don't know. But here's another question about this exact article. If we look actually right here, this guy, he is a Federal Reserve president. Now, keep in mind, he's not a doctor, and he's not a leader. He's not an elected official. He didn't get voted into office. The people didn't vote him into office. He was placed there. And now, a very powerful man, Federal Reserve president, is telling us it's going to be 18 months. He's an economist. He's an economist telling us we should be in our homes for 18 months. I don't know. It's one of those things that we should be very concerned about. Who is telling us what? This man's in front of our mass media telling us this. One last little story about COVID, which is insane. But they're saying now that you can be reactivated. It's almost, okay, like the 5G kids are going to go crazy over this. But, we knew this. We knew that people could get sick and then get sick again. We've known this for months. At least my class has known that for months. We've talked about it. And now these articles are appearing like this is new news. We're smarter than this. We know this. Why are they telling us this now? These are things that we should be concerned about. I'm just putting it out there. Anyways, let's keep it moving. Lastly, in terms of current events, your Democratic nominee has apparently been accused of sexual assault by a woman named Tara Reid, no relation to the D-list actress who stars in the Sharknado films, which I find to be very pleasant. But I digress. I find this to be interesting because not a lot of the left of center news is really reporting anything on this, which is extremely interesting because when Donald Trump was going through his sexual assault allegations in 2016, it was all over every channel, every website, and now this has happened to the Democratic nominee, and we're not seeing much traction on this story at all. It's something I'll keep paying attention to. I hope you guys do too. I'll bring you more the second I get it. We got to talk about 2008, 2007. We got to talk about the financial crisis. It was huge. The economy completely stopped. This was right in the middle of my grad school years in economics. I was trying to become a master of economics, and I wrote my thesis on this because it was happening while I was graduating. It was a big deal, and has everything to do with credit crunch, toxic assets, and a cascade of problem after problem after problem in our financial sector. It was crazy. But the question is, who, my dear friends, was at fault? To find out who may or may not have been at fault, we have to start at the beginning, right? We have to go back to the beginning. To go back to the beginning, we have to talk about the Great Depression. In the Great Depression, banking was new. Especially the kind of banking that they were doing, using derivatives, and, they were taking people's money that you deposited in there. that they were supposed to keep safe. And what did they do? The banks played the stock market with it. And then, of course, 1929 happened, and all the banks lost all of your money. All of your money. And then when that happened, people went broke. People freaked out. The entire economy shut down. And this is the story of people jumping out of buildings because they didn't want to go home and tell their wives that they used to have all this money, but in like that, it was gone. So the government put in place what is called the Glass-Steagall Act. Now, what this did was it separated banks from investment firms. No longer could banks play the stock market with your money. But, as most politicians do, they get tempted by the money. By the money. They get tempted by the money. The banks talked two presidents into repealing parts of this act. The Depository Deregulation and Monetary Act in 1980 was supported and signed by Jimmy Carter. Now, here's the thing. This led to the savings and loan crisis a few years later during Reagan's presidency. Glass-Steagall was completely repealed in 1999 and signed by Bill Clinton, which led to the 2008 financial crisis. Now, I want you to just pay attention to a couple things here. Most people don't want to tell you this, right? Now, Jimmy Carter was a Democrat, right? Now, he signed it out on his way out, right? His very last year in president, he signs this act. Now, a few years later, when the economy crashes, it's under a Republican president. Interesting. People think the Republicans can't handle the economy. And then, of course, Bill Clinton, in his last year, second to last year, he repeals the Glass-Steagall Act. And then in 2007, 2008, under another Republican president, the economy fails. Crazy. Look at what happens when you start repealing these acts, okay? Here is the Great Depression, right here. Glass-Steagall was signed, right? You start to see, this, by the way, is a graph of bank failures, the amount of banks that have completely gone under. Under Glass-Steagall, a very strong act that kept banks from using your money to play the stock market, there was almost no bank failures. And then, of course, the Monetary Deregulation Act was signed by Jimmy Carter, and we see the savings and loan crisis, right? Pretty big deal. All of a sudden, they get that under control, and then in 1999, which is right about here, it goes for a while, and then all of a sudden, we see the 2008 devastation that happened. And believe me, I survived it. Now, we're fixing to see something much worse, but we're not there yet. So let's see how long it takes us to get to much worse. We have to talk about something. We have to talk about the giant pool of money. Okay? Now, to understand why everything went crazy in 2008 and 2007, we have to understand the giant pool of money. First of all, you should know that the pool of all the money in the entire world, everything, every type of money, yen, dollar, Australian dollar, Canadian dollar, the ruble, every type of money in the entire world quadrupled in size after 1950. I have a graph of that right here. You can see that we were going along just fine. It was a pretty stable currency, and then all of a sudden everything got bigger. Now, why did that happen? Okay, so it's pretty complicated, but it's easy to say that, first of all, we started throwing lots of money into the system once we realized that fiat money was a thing. And remember, fiat money is just made up money. The only thing that gives our fiat dollar any kind of value is what we believe it to have. And once we started thinking that, our government started throwing money into the system. There's another reason. A lot of small countries started making TVs and toasters. And then all of a sudden, these countries got extremely rich from that, and we started seeing large amounts of money. So all of this money has managers, right? They all want to try to keep making just a little bit of money on the money that they already have. So in order to keep making money on that money, they have to invest it, right? And what's the safest investment that anybody could make prior to 2008? Well, that's a U.S. bond. Because U.S., quote-unquote, always pays their bills, right? We have always paid our bills. So a U.S. bond is by far the safest asset you could buy to try to make a little bit of profit on the money that you have, on your investments. And so the whole world was doing this. What were they doing? They were buying U.S. bonds. They're low interest. They're boring. They have strong, slow, little bit of growth. And then, and then something happened. Alan freaking Greenspan happened. And what he did was he saw that coming after the recession of the dot-com bubble, he lowered those interest rates to almost nothing. So now, instead of getting low, slow, reliable growth, you were getting no growth. And the money managers all over the world with that giant pool of money trying to make a little bit more every little day, they were just trying to make a little bit more, trying to make a little more money. They needed another asset. They needed to be able to purchase. They couldn't go to U.S. bonds anymore. They needed something new. So what did they do? They went to us. They went to us and started buying our U.S. housing bonds. They created instruments made of housing bonds, and we'll get to that in a second. But the thing is, they thought this was brilliant. First of all, Americans love owning homes, and they're for 30 years, and everybody pays their mortgage, right? Everybody pays their rent. They have a higher interest rate, much better than what Alan Greenspan was offering with this little teeny bit that Alan freaking Greenspan was giving them. And you know, this had these houses, we thought housing prices would never go down. We literally thought they would last and they would keep going up for as long as we could even imagine. These money managers, they created something called a CDO. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard this term thrown around, or maybe you haven't, because it's been about, 12 years since this crisis. But a CDO, this was brand new back then. It was blowing people's minds. What is a CDO? Well, it is a collateralized debt obligation. Essentially, it's taking a bunch of houses, a bunch of mortgages, with all different families owning a lot of different houses, and they put them all together, and they cut them up into little slices, and they sold them to you. So it wasn't just one bank owning your house. It was 30, 40, 50, 500 different investors all around the world owning tiny bits of pieces of your mortgage. This was a financial instrument. It was the most complicated thing at the time, okay? They bought and sold in the open market between investors, and it was made up of mortgages. And these mortgages, more and more, were being sold to everybody at almost no interest. And it got to the point where everybody that wanted a house had a house. Everybody that wanted a house got one. And so what they started doing was selling houses to people that couldn't afford houses, because it didn't matter if you could pay for it or not. Just as long as they could move the mortgage, as long as they could build a house and sell it to somebody. So you had people that couldn't afford houses getting loans when they didn't have to prove that they had a job. They didn't have to prove that they had assets. They didn't have to prove that they had any kind of wealth at all. And eventually you could see that this was going to blow up. What we had here, my friends, was a housing bubble, okay? This light blue line is the fair valuation of homes. I mean, essentially fair. It is exactly where the homes should be. But you could see that the actual housing prices were going up way farther than where they should have been. This, my dear friends, is a bubble. A bubble is when the actual prices are way above what they should be. And this is always going to burst, and it's always going to come back down to its actual price. After everything blew up, it spread from America. It started here in America. We started seeing major banks coming down, but that wasn't where it ended. It led to market disruptions across the globe. We're talking in Asia and in Europe, millions of jobs lost, billions of dollars just instantly gone in the blink of an eye. 4 countries in particular had a really hard time dealing with this. Portugal, Ireland, Spain, and Greece. Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. And we call these countries PIGS, okay? That's just a short acronym, PIGS. That's why I have a little cute little set of piglets here, so that it'll help you remember. Both Ireland and Spain were dealing through a housing bubble, much like ours, and Portugal and Greece were having a hard time managing the money that was given to them by Germany and France. So at the end of this, what did we learn? The answer is absolutely nothing. Here is the actual bubbles being burst, right? We can see here's the dot-com bubble. We see us going back to the steady state market. And then 2008, we see us going back to the steady state market. Here's where we were prior to COVID. We have a long way to fall, and even more than we did in 2008. That's all I have for you guys today. I will see you guys on Wednesday. Have the greatest 2 days